Hello. The topic for this week is absolutism, which is chapter 9. And this is the first chapter on Kant. Next week is chapter 10, and that is also Kant. It looks like Kant, but it's pronounced Kant. And I'm doing the chapter separately because Kantian ethics is a lot more complex than most of the ethical theories that we have looked at. And there's good things and bad things about it being a little bit more complex and involved. And one of the good things is that with the more simplistic theories like utilitarianism, which just says make people happy and you're good, or relativism, which just says do what your society says and you're good, a lot of stuff falls through the cracks when it's a really simplistic theory, and we end up with examples of things that come out of the equation either right or wrong, and we don't think that that's what the action should be morally. So if it's more complex, it's going to sort of stop things from getting through because there's going to be more fail-safes built in. But it also means that it's a little bit more difficult to understand and to apply. So this begins with the distinction between a hypothetical imperative and a categorical imperative. And an imperative is just a rule that you follow. So a hypothetical imperative, that's on 128, a hypothetical imperative is a rule that applies to you hypothetically if you're concerned with the outcome. So if you want to get an A in this class, you need to do all the reading and take the assignment seriously. Now that only applies to you if, number one, you're in this class, and number two, you care about getting an A. Otherwise, the rule doesn't apply to you. And the same thing with any other rule that we can think of. If you want to lose weight, then you need to move more and eat less. That only applies to you if you care about losing weight. It doesn't if you're fine with your current body weight or if you actually want to gain weight. So we can contrast these hypothetical imperatives with what Kant calls the categorical imperative. And he phrases it a lot of different ways, but the way that it's most commonly phrased and in your book is act only according to that maxim which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. So what that whole jargon mess means, first, a maxim. A maxim is not just a trashy magazine. It's a moral rule that you give yourself. And so what we're going to do is we're going to act according to a moral rule that we would at the same time wish that everybody else followed. Now, this may remind you a little bit of the Golden Rule, and Kant recognized that there were good things about the Golden Rule. It's really easy to apply. Anybody can do it. That's how we teach morality to children. Do unto others as you want them to do unto you. You can't hit Billy on the playground because you wouldn't want him to hit you. But there's also bad things with the Golden Rule and times when it fails. And one of the great examples is that there are people who maybe would want things done to them that they shouldn't be doing to other people, like a sadomasochist who actually obtains some sort of pleasure from being in a painful circumstance that doesn't give them the right to go harm other people simply because they might want somebody to do that to them. Also, you can imagine somebody that's such a fanatic, either as like a racist or a Nazi or something, that they would actually say, if I was a Jew, I would want somebody to kill me, or something equally ridiculous, because they're so committed to the cause. And really what's happening with the Golden Rule is it makes ethics subjective, because it says what you would want. So it's up to each individual to determine what they would want people to do. And we already saw the dangers with putting ethics in the hands of each individual person and personal preference. So Kant recognized that that's not going to work. So what we have maybe reminds you of the Golden Rule, but it's definitely not the same thing. Instead, we take a step back from the action and we look at the moral rule itself, the maxim. And second, we're not going to say, do you want people to follow this rule? Do you want this to be the world that you live in? So what we're going to do is whenever we're trying to face an action and figuring out what to do, we're going to first state our maxim clearly, so whatever moral rule we're following. And then second, we're going to imagine that everybody in the world not did the same action, but had the same moral principle, had the same maxim. And then third, we're going to ask ourselves, not would you like it, would you want to live in that world, but instead, would your original goal be accomplished if everyone shared this maxim? So here's an example. Some of you maybe are those type of people who drive on the shoulder to avoid traffic, to get around people or to get on your exit sooner or whatever it is. Now, if you are one of these people, or you at least have probably been annoyed by one of these people, What's the maxim, the moral rule that you're following? Now, it's just a rule, so it's generic. So the moral rule would be something like, I can break the rules of the road if it's going to benefit me. Now let's imagine that everybody in the world has that same maxim, that they will break traffic laws if they're going to benefit from doing so. Now we ask ourselves, not would you want to live in that world, and I hope you wouldn't because it would be chaos, but we're going to ask instead, would the original goal be accomplished? Now remember, the original goal was, I'm going to get where I need to go faster because I'm driving on the shoulder and breaking the law. Now, if everybody broke the rules of the road whenever they would benefit from it, you would no longer benefit from doing so because there would be just as many people on the shoulder or whatever, and you wouldn't get where you were going anywhere faster. So the only way that you benefit from that action is because other people aren't doing it. At least most people aren't doing it. So what that means is you're making an exception for yourself, and you're being inconsistent. You're holding other people to a higher standard than you're holding yourself. So in the same way that a utilitarian was all about happiness, a Kantian is going to be all about consistency and fairness. So we have to hold ourselves to the same standard as everybody else. We can't make exceptions for ourselves with morality. So Kantian ethics has three components. The categorical imperative is the first one. We're going to get the other two in chapter 10 next week. So that's the first part, is we run everything through this categorical imperative formulation to see whether or not we would will it to be universal law or a universal moral rule, what we call universalizing it. So if it passes the test and your goal would be accomplished in such a world, then it's morally right and you should do it. If it fails, like driving on the side of the freeway, and your goal wouldn't be accomplished because you're making an exception for yourself, then it's morally wrong and you can't do it. So we have the first part that we have to run through for Kantian ethics. So take, on the other side of the coin, if I have extra money, I should donate it to charity. Right? That could be a maxim. Now, if everybody in the world followed that, if they had extra money, they donated to charity, my original goal of helping people and being charitable would absolutely be accomplished. In fact, it would be accomplished a lot easier because there would be a lot more people being charitable and helpful, and a lot more people would be helped and assisted. So it passes the categorical imperative. We get a yes. It's universalizable, which is not an easy word to say, and it's morally right, and that's what we should do. Now, the absolutism part, which is what this chapter is titled, absolutism is the belief that moral rules are absolute, meaning they apply to everyone, everywhere, all the time, regardless of circumstances. So it's basically the opposite of anything subjective or relativistic. So moral rules are like math. So 2 + 2 is 4, anywhere, anytime. It doesn't matter the society or culture or circumstances. And Kant thought moral rules were the same way. Now what this means is that there are 0 exceptions. So Kant didn't think everything was absolute, but he definitely thought certain things were, including killing, but he was in favor of the death penalty, which is a little bit interesting. And as your book spends time talking about lying, Kant thought that lying was always morally wrong, no matter what the circumstances. Now, I think it's unfortunate that Kant went this route because, number one, it's problematic because we make exceptions for lying all the time. So if you are in Nazi Germany hiding Jews in your attic and Nazis come to your door and say, are there any Jews here? Not only do we feel like lying would not be wrong in that circumstance, but we probably actually feel like the lie would be the morally correct thing to do. And if you were honest and said, oh yeah, they're upstairs, we would probably think that was morally wrong to tell the truth in that circumstance. So we make exceptions for lying for much smaller things, like not hurting somebody's feelings if they ask you if they look fat in their outfit or whatever it is. So it's a problem for a lot of people that Kant just said, absolutely no way, you can't ever lie. Now, the other sad thing about, other than the fact that this is just a difficulty for his theory, is that he didn't need to do this. So the types of lies that Kant was concerned with would be the ones that are intentional deceptions that we would benefit from. So I'm going to lie so that I can, I don't know, get off work without, with some BS excuse. Or I'm going to lie so that my significant other doesn't find out I cheated, or something like that. Now, those are the kind of lies we don't want to make exceptions for in general. Now, if you run those through the categorical imperative, they wouldn't pass. So if you lie to get off of work, for example, if everybody else lied whenever they would benefit from it, then you wouldn't benefit from lying because nobody would believe anybody. The only reason that you benefit from lying is because people believe you. And the reason people believe you is because, for the most part, people tend to be honest about a lot of things. And so they trust you and they believe you. If everybody lied whenever they would benefit, you wouldn't benefit from lying because everybody would just lie constantly and nobody would believe you. So again, you're making an exception for yourself. But in the case of the Nazi example, if you're lying to save an innocent life, which is what's happening there, then that goal could be accomplished if everybody lied in the random circumstances in which it would save an innocent life. That would pass the categorical imperative, and that is universalizable. So Kant didn't need to say that lies are always, always wrong, because the type of lies he was concerned about wouldn't have passed the categorical imperative, and the lies that we want to make an exception for would. So his theory already is built in to eliminate the possibility of being able to lie in the deceitful ways that he was worried about. So most people nowadays that are followers of Kantian ethics just kind of forget the absolutism part and follow the categorical imperative, and then the remaining two components of the theory that we're going to talk about next week. So even if things get through the categorical imperative, which I'll give you an example of that next week, it's going to get caught up in some of the future tests. So that's what's going on with chapter 9. Hopefully you read this and you understand what's going on. I know Kant is a little bit more tricky. I highly suggest you avoid the internet because I think that either it will be false information or way more confusing because Kant is very difficult. So feel free to email me if you have any questions. Your quiz is up. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.